He came home from war with a Purple Heart and shrapnel still lodged near his spine, only to discover his own family had erased him, sold his home, stolen his inheritance, and left him for dead on the streets. But when he took shelter inside a rusting cruise ship everyone said was haunted, what he found hidden in the darkness beneath the lower decks wasn't just salvation, it was $265 million in forgotten treasure, and it would make the family who betrayed him regret every single lie they ever told. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Greyhound bus pulled into Port Madison just after 7 in the evening, its brakes hissing like an exhausted beast finally allowed to rest. Marcus Webb sat in the back row, his forehead pressed against the cold window, watching the familiar streets roll past. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. The buildings seemed to sag under the weight of years. The streetlights flickered weakly against the gathering dusk. Even the sky seemed dimmer, pressed down by clouds that promised rain but never quite delivered. He shifted in his seat, and the movement sent a sharp spike of pain up his left leg. The shrapnel was still there, lodged deep in the muscle near his spine. The doctors had offered to try removing it, but the surgery came with risks. Paralysis, nerve damage, complications that could leave him worse off than he already was. So Marcus had chosen to keep the metal fragment, a permanent reminder of the blast that had torn through his unit during his third tour. 7 men hit, 3 survived. Marcus was one of them, but some days he wasn't sure if that made him lucky or cursed. The bus jerked to a stop at the station, a squat concrete building with a faded sign and flickering neon that spelled "Welcome" in letters that hadn't worked properly since 1998. Marcus grabbed his olive-drab duffel bag from the overhead compartment, the same bag he'd carried through 3 deployments, and slung it over his shoulder. His right hand instinctively reached for the cane leaning against the seat beside him. The cane was military issue, black aluminum with a rubber grip, functional and ugly. He hated it, hated what it represented, but without it, he couldn't walk more than 50 feet before his leg gave out completely. He stepped off the bus into air that smelled like diesel fuel, salt water, and old coffee. The station was nearly empty. A tired-looking woman behind the ticket counter glanced up at him, took in the military patches on his jacket, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement before returning to her phone. Marcus stood there for a moment, duffel bag weighing on his shoulder, cane gripping the pavement, and realized he had absolutely no idea what came next. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. 7 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize, 4 voicemails he hadn't listened to, and 1 text message from his sister Jennifer's number. The text was short, blunt, almost cruel in its simplicity. "Don't come here." Marcus stared at those 3 words until they blurred. Don't come here. He was already here. Port Madison was home. Or at least it was supposed to be. The house on Maple Street, the one his grandfather had built with his own hands in 1963, the one Marcus had inherited when the old man passed away 4 years ago, that house was supposed to be waiting for him. It was all he'd thought about during the long nights in the desert, the firefights, the endless patrols, the moment when the IED detonated and the world turned into fire and screaming. He'd survived. He'd come home. And now his sister was telling him not to come. Marcus's jaw tightened. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, shouldered his bag, and walked out into the parking lot. A taxi idled near the curb, its driver reading a newspaper under the dome light. Marcus tapped on the window. The driver, a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, rolled down the window. "Need a ride, son?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "Maple Street. 3rd house on the left." The driver's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been concern or pity. "Hop in!" They drove through town in silence. Marcus watched the streets pass, each one triggering memories. There was the corner store where he'd bought candy as a kid, the park where he'd learned to ride a bike, the high school where he'd graduated with barely passing grades because he'd been too busy working in his grandfather's garage, learning to fix engines and build things that lasted. Everything looked the same but felt different. Like a photograph left in the sun too long. The colors faded, the details softened by time and distance. When they turned onto Maple Street, Marcus sat forward, his heart suddenly pounding. The houses rolled past, first one, second one, and then nothing. Where his house should have been, where the white clapboard structure with blue shutters and a wraparound porch should have stood, there was instead a brand-new duplex. Fresh paint, manicured lawn, a realtor's sign out front with a cheerful red banner that read, "Sold." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. "Stop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stop the car." The taxi pulled to the curb. Marcus climbed out slowly, his legs screaming in protest, and stood staring at the property. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. He walked forward, cane tapping against the sidewalk until he reached the mailbox. The name on it wasn't Webb, it was Patterson. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the street, looking for anything familiar. But there was nothing. The oak tree his grandfather had planted was gone. The driveway where Marcus had changed his first tire was buried under new concrete. Even the fence line had been moved. A woman stepped out of the duplex, mid-40s, yoga pants, coffee mug in hand. She saw Marcus standing there, and her expression shifted from curiosity to wariness. "Can I help you?" she called out. Marcus's mouth was dry. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm looking for a house that used to be here, white with blue shutters. Belonged to the Webb family." Her face softened with understanding. "Oh, that place. Yeah, it was torn down about 6 or 8 months ago. The new owners bought the lot and built this." She gestured to the duplex behind her. "I just moved in a few weeks ago. 6 to 8 months. Marcus had been overseas 6 to 8 months ago. Still deployed. Still dodging bullets and trying to keep his unit alive. "Do you know who sold it?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would hurt. The woman shook her head. "Sorry, I don't. You might want to check with the county assessor's office. They keep records of all property sales." Marcus thanked her, his voice hollow, and walked back to the taxi. The driver was watching him in the rearview mirror with an expression that said he'd seen this story before. "Where to now?" the driver asked gently. "Courthouse," Marcus said. "County clerk's office." The courthouse was a gray stone building at the center of town, surrounded by tired grass and monument plaques no one read anymore. Marcus paid the driver, climbed the steps one painful stride at a time, and pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and floor wax. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A bored-looking woman sat behind a plexiglass window, typing on a keyboard that looked older than Marcus. "Help you?" she asked without looking up. "I need property records," Marcus said. "Maple Street. I need to know who sold a house there about 6 to 8 months ago." She sighed, clicked a few keys, and asked for the address. Marcus gave it to her. She pulled up the information, squinted at her screen, and then turned it slightly so he could see. "Says here, the property was sold 8 months ago. Transferred ownership to Coastal Development LLC. Previous owners." She scrolled down. Jennifer Webb and Daniel Webb. Joint power of attorney. Marcus felt like someone had kicked him in the chest. Jennifer and Daniel, his sister and brother. They'd sold his house, the house their grandfather had left to him. The house Marcus had paid taxes on even while deployed, scraping together money from his military pay to make sure it stayed in the family. "That's not possible," Marcus said, his voice tight. "I own that house. It was left to me in my grandfather's will." The woman gave him a look that was equal parts sympathy and exhaustion. "Do you have documentation, a deed, copy of the will?" "I was deployed," Marcus said. "I've been overseas for 3 years. She sighed again, softer this time. "I'm sorry, hun, but according to these records, they had legal power of attorney. If you think there's been a mistake, you'll need to contact a lawyer, maybe contest it in probate court." "How?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. How could they have power of attorney? Family members can petition for it if someone's unable to manage their affairs. Military deployment sometimes qualifies, especially if there's a financial need or emergency situation. Marcus stepped back from the window, his mind spinning. Jennifer and Daniel had convinced a judge he couldn't manage his own property. They'd lied. They'd forged documents or manipulated the system. And they'd sold his home out from under him while he was getting shot at halfway across the world. He pulled out his phone and called Jennifer's number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. He tried Daniel's number. Same thing. He sent a text to both of them, his fingers shaking as he typed, "What the hell did you do?" No response, just silence. By the time Marcus left the courthouse, the sun had set completely. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. He stood on the steps, duffel bag at his feet, cane in one hand, and nowhere to go. He had $63 in his wallet, a phone with 12% battery, and a family that had erased him. For a long moment he considered just walking, picking a direction and disappearing into the night. But his leg wouldn't make it. Hell, his heart wouldn't make it. So instead, he walked toward the only place he could think of, the waterfront. Port Madison's industrial waterfront stretched for nearly 2 miles along the coast, a graveyard of rusted shipping containers, abandoned warehouses, and docks that hadn't seen regular use in decades. Marcus walked slowly, his cane tapping a lonely rhythm against the cracked pavement. The wind off the water was cold, biting through his jacket and carrying the smell of salt, oil, and decay. He passed a few homeless people huddled in doorways, wrapped in blankets and cardboard. They watched him with hollow eyes but said nothing. He was one of them now, another casualty of a system that chewed people up and spit them out. At the far end of the port, beyond the active shipping lanes and working docks, Marcus saw something that made him stop. A ship. Not a cargo vessel. A cruise ship. Massive. Old. Tilted slightly to one side like it was too tired to stand straight anymore. It sat in the water like a ghost, its windows dark, its hull streaked with rust and grime. Marcus had heard stories about that ship. The locals called it the Empress. It had been docked there since the early 2000s, waiting for repairs that never came, for an owner who never returned. Kids told stories about it being haunted. Vagrants claimed you could hear voices inside at night. Most people just ignored it, another piece of forgotten history slowly rotting into the harbor. Marcus stared at the ship for a long time. Then he started walking toward it. The dock leading to the Empress was in rough shape. Wooden planks sagged and creaked under his weight. A chain had been stretched across the gangway at some point, but it had rusted through and now hung limp on one side. Warning signs, faded and peeling, read, "No trespassing," and "Danger, unstable structure." Marcus stepped over the chain and climbed the gangway, his cane finding purchase on the textured metal. The ship groaned as he boarded, a deep sound that echoed through the hull. He paused at the top, listening. Nothing but the wind and the gentle lap of water against metal. He found a door that opened with a hard shove, the hinges protesting with a screech that made him wince. Inside, the air was stale but dry. Warmer, too, sheltered from the wind. He clicked on his phone's flashlight, the battery now at 8%, and swept the beam across the interior. He was in a corridor. Faded carpet runners, brass fixtures tarnished to dull brown, signs still pointing toward different decks, dining hall, casino, theater, cabins. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a snapshot of a life that had stopped suddenly and never resumed. Marcus moved carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. Most of the doors he tried were locked or jammed, but eventually he found one that opened into a small cabin. It wasn't much. A narrow bed with a mildewed mattress, a porthole window with a view of the port lights in the distance, a closet barely big enough to stand in. but it was shelter. It was dry. And it was his, at least for tonight. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs groaned beneath him. He stared at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of military service and hard work, and felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. His family had betrayed him, stolen from him, left him with nothing. He'd survived war, survived pain and fear and loss. But this felt different. This was a wound that wouldn't heal with time. This was personal. His phone buzzed. He looked down. One message from Jennifer. "We needed the money, I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation, no real apology, just a weak excuse and 2 words that meant nothing. Marcus felt something break inside him. Not rage, not even sadness, just a cold, hollow emptiness. He turned off the phone to save the last bit of battery and lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The ship groaned and shifted around him, metal settling against metal. Somewhere far below he heard a sound, a low rhythmic thump, like something heavy being dragged or something knocking. Marcus sat up, heart suddenly pounding. He grabbed his cane and stood listening. The sound came again. Thump, thump, thump. Steady, deliberate. Not random, not the tide or the wind, something else. He moved to the cabin door and opened it slowly, peering into the hallway. Nothing, just darkness and the faint glow of his phone's dying flashlight. The thumping stopped. Marcus stood in the doorway for a full minute, every sense on high alert, trained by years of combat to recognize threats. But there was nothing, just silence, just the ship. He closed the door, wedged his duffel bag against it, and lay back down. He told himself it was just the structure settling. Old ships made noise, pipes, joints, metal expanding and contracting. That was all. But sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of fire, explosions, and the faces of men he'd watched die. He woke twice in the night, gasping, covered in sweat. Each time the ship was quiet. Each time he forced himself to breathe slowly, to count backward from 10, to use the techniques the VA counselor had taught him. By morning, pale light filtered through the porthole window. Marcus sat up slowly, his body aching, his leg throbbing. He checked his phone. 4% battery. No new messages. He stood and looked out the porthole at the port stretching before him. From here, he could see the city in the distance, the place that was supposed to be home, the place that had rejected him. He thought about leaving, finding a shelter, calling the VA, trying to piece together some kind of life from the wreckage. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was something else, something that whispered in the back of his mind that this ship, this forgotten place, held answers he didn't yet know to ask for. Marcus grabbed his duffel bag and decided to explore. If this ship was going to be his shelter, even temporarily, he needed to know every inch of it. He needed to understand its layout, its dangers, its secrets. He started on the upper decks. The sun deck was open to the sky, railings rusted and flaking. A few deck chairs remained, bolted to the floor but weathered to bare frames. The view from here was stunning. The entire port, the city beyond, the mountains in the distance. For a moment, Marcus just stood there, breathing in the cold morning air, feeling almost human again. He worked his way down through the levels. The bridge was locked, but through the windows he could see old navigation equipment, charts pinned to walls, coffee mugs still sitting on consoles. It looked like the crew had just walked away mid-shift. The main deck held the dining hall, a cavernous space with tables bolted to the floor and a grand piano in the corner. The keys were yellowed and stuck, but when Marcus pressed one, it made a soft, mournful sound that echoed through the empty room. The kitchen beyond had been gutted, appliances removed, but the walk-in freezer still worked. He pulled the door open and stepped inside. Empty, cold, sealed tight. He made a mental note. Good storage, good shelter if things got bad. He moved through the casino. The slot machines had been removed, leaving just empty spaces and dangling wires. The card tables were bare, their felt surfaces stained and peeling. The theater still had rows of seats facing a stage draped in mildew-stained curtains. Marcus walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the vast space, and for a moment he imagined what this place must have looked like in its prime, full of people, laughter, music, life. Now it was just a tomb. But as he explored deeper into the ship, moving through crew quarters and storage rooms, he began to notice something strange. Some doors were rusted shut, barely holding together. But others, doors marked crew only or restricted access, those were different. Those had newer locks, cleaner hinges, like someone had maintained them recently. Marcus found one near the stern of the ship, a heavy door marked Engineering Access. The lock was new, the handle polished. He tried it, locked tight. Why would an abandoned ship have new locks? Who was maintaining them? And what were they protecting? He stood there for a long moment staring at that door and felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in months. Curiosity, purpose, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this forgotten ship held more than rusted metal and broken dreams. That night, as Marcus lay in his cabin listening to the ship groan and settle around him, he heard the thumping again, thump, 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 coming from somewhere below. He didn't investigate, not yet, but he made another mental note. Tomorrow he'd find a way through that locked door. Tomorrow he'd discover what secrets the Empress was hiding, because Marcus Webb had been betrayed, cast aside, left with nothing. But he was still a Marine, and Marines didn't quit. They adapted, they overcame, and they damn sure didn't walk away from a mystery. The first week on the Empress taught Marcus Webb how to survive on almost nothing. He rationed the canned goods he found in an old crew pantry, mostly beans and soup with expiration dates from 2006, but still edible if you didn't think too hard about it. He collected rainwater in buckets he'd found in a maintenance closet, boiling it on a small camping stove someone had abandoned years ago. The porthole in his cabin became his window to the world, and through it he watched the port come alive each morning and die each night, a rhythm he was no longer part of. But Marcus wasn't just surviving, he was planning. Each day he explored a different section of the ship, mapping it out in a notebook he'd found in the bridge. He sketched the layout, marked which doors were open, which were jammed, and which were locked with hardware that looked far too new for an abandoned vessel. The locked doors bothered him. They didn't fit. Everything else on this ship screamed neglect, decay, abandonment. But those doors, especially the ones marked restricted access, they told a different story. Someone had been here, recently. Someone had maintained specific sections while letting everything else rot. The question was why. On the 8th day, Marcus decided to stop wondering and start finding out. He'd been in the military long enough to know that locked doors usually protected something worth protecting, and he'd been a mechanic's apprentice long enough to know that every lock could be defeated with the right tools and enough patience. He started in the crew quarters, digging through storage lockers and maintenance bays. Most had been picked clean, but in a tool room near the engine deck he hit gold. A metal toolbox, rusted but functional, filled with wrenches, screwdrivers, a pry bar, and best of all, a set of bolt cutters with enough heft to cut through a padlock. Marcus carried his findings back to his cabin and laid them out on the bed like weapons before a mission. In a way, that's exactly what they were. He was going into unknown territory, breaching secured areas, operating without backup or intel. Every instinct told him to be careful, but another voice, quieter but more insistent, told him he had nothing left to lose. He'd already lost everything. What was a little trespassing compared to that? That afternoon, Marcus returned to the locked door near the stern, the one marked Engineering Access. He studied it carefully in the daylight, filtering through a nearby porthole. The lock was a heavy-duty padlock, commercial grade, maybe 5 years old at most, definitely not original to the ship. He positioned the bolt cutters, braced himself against the wall for leverage, and squeezed. The metal resisted. His arms shook. His injured leg screamed in protest as he shifted his weight. But then, With a sharp crack that echoed through the corridor, the lock gave way. The pieces clattered to the floor. Marcus stood there for a moment, breathing hard, listening for any sound that someone might have heard. Nothing. Just the ever-present groan of the ship and the distant cry of seagulls. He pushed the door open. Beyond it was a stairwell, narrow and steep, leading down into darkness. The air that rolled up was colder, drier, different from the rest of the ship. It smelled like metal and oil, but also something else, something preserved. Marcus clicked on his flashlight, the one he'd bought at a convenience store with the last of his cash, and descended. The stairs went down 2 levels, deeper than he'd expected, past the waterline, into what must have been the very bottom of the ship's hull. At the base of the stairs was a corridor, and this corridor was different from anything Marcus had seen above. It was clean, not spotless, but maintained. The floor had been swept recently. The pipes along the walls showed no rust. Light fixtures, though not powered, were intact and dust-free. Someone had been caring for this space. Marcus moved forward slowly, his cane tapping softly against the metal floor. The corridor stretched about 50 feet before ending at another door. This one wasn't locked. It opened with a gentle push, the hinges recently oiled and silent. What Marcus found on the other side made him stop breathing. The room was enormous, easily 40 feet wide and twice that long, carved out of the ship's lowest deck, and it was filled with crates, wooden crates, metal crates, plastic containers, all of them stacked neatly, organized with military precision, labeled with numbers and codes he didn't understand. But it wasn't just the quantity that shocked him, it was the condition. Everything was pristine, climate-controlled somehow despite the ship's abandonment. The air was cool and dry, no mildew, no water damage, just rows and rows of carefully preserved cargo that had been sitting here in the dark for God knew how long. Marcus approached the nearest crate, his hands trembling slightly. It was wooden, about 3 feet square, with metal brackets at the corners, and a label that read, Item 47, Landscape Oil, 1872. He found a crowbar among the tools scattered on a nearby workbench and carefully pried the crate open. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth and sealed in plastic, was a painting. Marcus lifted it out gently, unwrapped it, and held it up to his flashlight. The painting showed a European countryside, rolling hills, a lake reflecting the sky, mountains in the distance. The colors were rich despite their age. The brushwork was exquisite. And in the bottom right corner was a signature. Marcus didn't recognize the name, but something about the style felt important, valuable. He carefully rewrapped the painting and set it down. His heart was hammering now, adrenaline flooding his system. He moved to the next crate and opened it. Sculptures. Small bronze figures, beautifully detailed, each one wrapped individually and catalogued with a number. The next crate held books, old books, leather-bound with gold lettering on the spines. First editions, maybe, rare volumes, the kind of things you saw behind glass in museums. Marcus opened crate after crate, each one revealing more treasures. Jewelry. Antique furniture, disassembled and carefully stored. Ceramics, glasswork, maps, coins. Each piece wrapped, protected, preserved with a level of care that spoke of knowledge and intention. And then he found the metal cases. 6 of them, stacked in the corner, each one about the size of a large briefcase with combination locks built into the handles. Marcus carried one to the workbench and studied the lock. 3-digit combinations, thousands of possibilities. He could try to crack it, but that would take hours, maybe days. Instead, he looked around the room and spotted a filing cabinet against the far wall. He walked over, pulled open the top drawer, and found exactly what he needed. Files, records, manifests, and a small envelope taped to the inside of the drawer with a handwritten label that said Access Codes. Marcus opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a list of numbers, 6 combinations, each one labeled with a case number. He carried the paper back to the metal cases, found case number 1, and dialed in the combination. The lock clicked open. He lifted the lid slowly, almost afraid of what he might find. Inside were stacks of bills, not old bills, not foreign currency, United States dollars, hundreds, bundled with paper bands and sealed in plastic. Each bundle was marked with a denomination, $10,000. Marcus pulled one bundle out, turned it over in his hands, held it up to the light. It was real. He could tell by the weight, the texture, the way the light caught the security strip embedded in each bill. He looked back at the case. There were at least 20 more bundles inside. $200,000, just in this one case. He opened the second case. More money. The third, the fourth. By the time he'd opened all 6 cases, Marcus was sitting on the floor, his back against the workbench, staring at more cash than he'd ever seen in his life. He did the math 3 times, sure he was getting it wrong, but the numbers didn't change. $4,200,000 in cash, sitting in 6 cases in the belly of an abandoned ship. Who kept this much money hidden? Who went to this much trouble to preserve it? And why had they left it here? Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. He stood and went back to the filing cabinet, pulling out more files. He found what he was looking for in the second drawer. A leather-bound ledger, thick and heavy, with pages that crackled when he opened them. The first page had a title written in careful calligraphy, Collection of Alistair Pembroke, Private Acquisition, intended for Maritime Museum installation. Below that was a date, June 12, 2002. Marcus flipped through the pages. Each one listed items in the collection. Paintings with artist names, dates, and estimated values. Sculptures, antiquities, rare books. The list went on for pages, hundreds of items, and at the bottom of each page, running totals. By the time Marcus reached the final page, his hands were shaking again. The last entry was dated November 3, 2003. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, different from the careful script on earlier pages. It read, Collection complete, total acquisition cost, $89,400,000. Current estimated value, $147 million. Intended use, permanent exhibition aboard Empress Maritime Museum, opening date pending final renovations. Note, additional funds secured for operational costs, $4,200,000 cash reserve. Total assets secured, $151,200,000. Below that, in the same shaky hand, God willing, this will be my legacy. A place where people can see beauty, where they can remember what matters, where the past is preserved for the future. A P. Marcus read the note 3 times. A P. Alistair Pembroke. He'd heard that name before, hadn't he? He closed his eyes, trying to remember. And then it came to him. A news story from years ago, back when he was in high school. A local businessman who died suddenly. There'd been some kind of scandal afterward, a family fighting over his estate, legal battles, assets disappearing. Marcus had been too young to care about the details. But now those details mattered. Now they mattered more than anything. He pulled out his phone, praying he still had a sliver of battery left. 3%. He opened the browser and searched for Alistair Pembroke. The connection was weak, but eventually a page loaded. Port Madison Herald, obituary section, November 8, 2003. Alistair Pembroke, 71, prominent businessman and art collector, died unexpectedly of a heart attack at his estate on November 4th. Pembroke was known for his extensive collection of maritime art and his plans to convert the cruise ship Empress into a floating museum. He is survived by his son Gregory Pembroke and daughter Vanessa Pembroke. Marcus read the date of death again. November 4th, 2003. One day after the final entry in the ledger. Pembroke had finished cataloging his collection, had secured everything, had written that note about his legacy, and then died the next day. Before he could open his museum, before anyone knew what he'd accomplished. And in the chaos that followed his death, with family members fighting and lawyers arguing and assets being disputed. This collection had simply been forgotten, left here in the dark, waiting. Marcus scrolled through more search results. He found articles about the legal battles, about Pembroke's children accusing each other of fraud, about the estate being tied up in probate for years, about the Empress being deemed too expensive to repair and eventually abandoned by the courts. But nowhere in any of the articles did anyone mention the collection. Nobody knew it was here. Nobody had checked. They'd argued over the shell of the ship while the treasure sat beneath their feet, untouched, unseen, gathering value in the darkness. Marcus's phone died, the screen going black. He sat in the silent vault, surrounded by millions of dollars in art and artifacts, and tried to process what this meant. He'd stumbled onto something enormous, something that legally belonged to someone, though he had no idea who. The Pembroke estate, the courts, the city, but legally also meant nothing if nobody knew about it. If nobody had claimed it in over 20 years, was it still theirs? Or did it belong to whoever found it? Maritime salvage law. That was a thing, wasn't it? If a ship was abandoned, if property was lost and unclaimed, the person who recovered it might have rights to it. Marcus wasn't a lawyer. He had no idea how any of that actually worked, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This collection couldn't just sit here forever. Pembroke had wanted it to be seen, had wanted it to mean something, and maybe, just maybe, Marcus could make that happen. He spent the rest of that day documenting everything he could. He used the last of his phone's battery to take photos of the ledger, the manifest, the identification tags on the crates. He made notes on paper he found in the filing cabinet, sketching the room's layout, counting the crates, trying to get an accurate inventory. By the time night fell and his flashlight began to dim, Marcus had a rough count. 34 crates of art and artifacts, 6 cases of cash, and according to the ledger's final calculations, a total value of over $150 million. But that was in 2003, 22 years ago. If the collection had increased in value at even a modest rate, accounting for inflation and the art market's growth, it could be worth significantly more now. Maybe 200 million, maybe more. Marcus sat in his cabin that night, staring at the notes spread across the thin mattress, and felt something he hadn't felt since before the war. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of a drowning man, but real hope. The kind built on solid ground. He had found something that mattered, something valuable not just in dollars but in purpose. Pembroke had wanted to create a museum, a place where people could see beauty and remember what mattered. Marcus understood that now, because he'd spent 3 years in a desert where beauty was scarce and what mattered was simply staying alive. He'd come home to find his family had stolen his past, but maybe he'd found a way to build a future. The next morning, Marcus returned to the vault with fresh determination. He needed to understand the full scope of what he'd found. He opened more crates, photographing their contents with a disposable camera he'd bought from a vending machine at the port. He found paintings by artists whose names he recognized from textbooks, sculptures that belonged in museums, jewelry pieces that sparkled even in the dim light of his flashlight, and maps, old nautical charts, expedition logs, documents that chronicled centuries of maritime history. Each piece told a story. Each one was a fragment of the past, carefully preserved, waiting to be remembered. In one crate, he found something that made his throat tighten. A ship's bell, polished brass, engraved with a name, USS Providence. Below that, a date, 1776. Marcus held it carefully, feeling the weight of history in his hands. This bell had rung on a Revolutionary War vessel. It had called sailors to action, marked time, sounded alarms, and now it sat here, in the dark, forgotten. He thought about the men who'd served on that ship, who'd heard this bell, who'd fought and died for something they believed in. He thought about his own service, about the brothers he'd lost, about coming home to a country that seemed to have forgotten what sacrifice meant. And he understood, suddenly and completely, why this mattered. Not because of the money, not because of what he could gain, but because some things were worth more than their market value. Some things needed to be preserved, honored, remembered. And if Marcus could do that, if he could finish what Pembroke started, maybe his own sacrifice wouldn't feel so meaningless. He was wrapping the bell back in its protective cloth when he heard something. Footsteps. Above him. On the deck directly overhead. Marcus froze, every muscle tensing. He'd been on this ship for over a week and hadn't seen another living soul. The port workers kept their distance, vagrants avoided it. Who was walking around up there? He moved quickly but quietly to the door, closing it most of the way and listening. The footsteps were heavy, boots on metal, moving with purpose, not wandering, and they were getting closer. Marcus grabbed his cane and positioned himself behind the door, ready to defend what he'd found. The footsteps reached the stairwell, started descending. Marcus could hear breathing now, heavy and labored, like someone not used to climbing. The steps grew louder, closer, and then they stopped, right outside the door. Marcus held his breath, his heart hammered against his ribs. The door handle turned slowly. The door swung open. And a man stepped into the vault. He was old, maybe 70, with silver hair and weathered skin. He wore dock workers' coveralls and carried a flashlight. He swept the beam across the room, saw Marcus standing there with his cane raised like a weapon, and stopped cold. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the old man raised his hands slowly. "Easy, son," he said, his voice rough but calm. "I'm not here to hurt you. Name's Raymond Shaw. I'm a dock worker. Well, retired now. But I used to work this port when Alistair Pembroke was still alive." Marcus didn't lower the cane. "How did you know I was here?" Raymond smiled faintly. "I've been watching the ship. Old habit. I was the one who helped Pembroke set up this vault, helped him carry these crates down here, swore I'd keep it secret until someone came looking, didn't expect it to take 22 years. He gestured to the room. But here you are. And judging by the open crates, you've figured out what you're sitting on." Marcus lowered the cane slowly. "You knew about all this? For 22 years?" "Every piece," Raymond said. "Alistair was my friend. More than that, really. He was the last good man in this town. When he died, his kids tried to tear everything apart. I couldn't let them destroy this, so I kept it hidden. Kept it safe. Been checking on it every few months, making sure the seals held, the climate control still worked." "Climate control?" Marcus asked. Raymond pointed to a corner Marcus hadn't explored yet. There, tucked behind a stack of crates, was a small generator and a dehumidifier system, both running silently. "Solar panels on the roof," Raymond explained, disguised as rust patches. Pembroke was thorough. He wanted this collection to survive even if he didn't. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He sat down on a crate, processing this. "Why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Raymond's expression hardened. "Tell who? The courts that let this ship rot? The family that would have sold everything to pay lawyers? The city that didn't give a damn about Alistair's dream?" He shook his head. "No, I was waiting for the right person. Someone who'd understand what this means, what it could be." "And you think I'm that person?" Marcus asked. "I'm homeless. I'm living on this ship because my own family stole everything from me. I don't have the resources or the knowledge to do anything with this." Raymond studied him for a long moment. "You're military," he said, nodding to the patches on Marcus's jacket. "Marine Corps. You served. You sacrificed. You understand duty, honor. That's more than Pembroke's kids ever had." He stepped closer. "I'm 73 years old. I don't have much time left. But before I go, I want to see Alistair's dream realized. And I think you're the one who can do it, if you're willing." What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Marcus stood slowly, looking around the vault with new eyes. This wasn't just a collection anymore. It was a responsibility, a mission, and maybe, just maybe, it was his chance at redemption. "Okay," he said quietly. "Tell me everything. Tell me about Pembroke. Tell me what he wanted. And tell me how the hell I'm supposed to turn this into something that matters." Raymond smiled. The first real smile Marcus had seen since boarding this ship. "First," Raymond said, "we need to figure out the legal side, because the moment anyone finds out about this, they're going to come for it. The Pembroke family, the courts, maybe even the government. You need protection, you need lawyers, and you need a plan." "I don't have money for lawyers," Marcus said. "I've got $63 to my name and a family that already proved they'll steal everything if I turn my back." Raymond nodded thoughtfully. "Then we start with documentation. We prove you found it. We establish your salvage claim. And we find someone who understands maritime law and isn't afraid of a fight." He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to Marcus. It was worn, the edges soft with age, but the name was still legible. Caroline Hart, Maritime and Property Law. "She's tough," Raymond said. "She's fair. And she helped Alistair draw up the original plans for this museum before he died. If anyone can help you, it's her." Marcus took the card, feeling its weight like a promise. For the first time since stepping off that Greyhound bus, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone. Maybe there were still people in this world who understood what honor meant, who believed in something bigger than themselves. Raymond walked around the vault one last time, his flashlight beam caressing the crates like old friends. "You know what the final tally was?" he asked. "What Pembroke estimated this collection was worth?" Marcus pulled out his notes. "The ledger said 151 million in 2003. Raymond nodded. "But art values have changed. Some of these pieces, they've tripled in value, maybe more. I've been doing research over the years, checking auction records when I can." He turned to face Marcus. "Conservative estimate, accounting for current market values? This collection is worth $265 million. The number hung in the air between them like a physical weight. $265 million. Marcus had found a $250 million treasure in the belly of a ship everyone had forgotten. He'd come home with nothing. His family had stripped him of everything he'd inherited, everything he'd fought to protect. But now he stood in a vault filled with more wealth than he could comprehend, wealth that could change everything. Not just for him, but for others like him. Veterans who'd come home broken, families who'd lost everything, people who needed to believe that beauty and purpose still existed in a world that had gone cold. 265 million, Marcus repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Jesus. Not Jesus, Raymond said with a slight smile. Just one stubborn old man who believed beauty mattered more than profit. And now it's your turn. What are you going to do with it? Marcus looked around the vault one more time, at the paintings wrapped in cloth, at the sculptures waiting to be seen, at the cases of cash that could change lives, at the ship's bell from the USS Providence, silent for 247 years. He thought about Alistair Pembroke, who'd spent a lifetime gathering these treasures, about Raymond Shaw, who'd guarded them for over 2 decades, about all the people who'd forgotten that some things were worth preserving, worth protecting, worth fighting for. And he thought about himself, about Marcus Webb, who'd survived war and betrayal, who'd lost everything and found himself living in the ruins of someone else's dream, who'd been given one more chance to make his life mean something. I'm going to finish what Pembroke started, Marcus said, his voice steady now, certain. I'm going to build the museum he wanted, but not just for art, for people, for veterans who need purpose, for families who need hope, for anyone who's ever been told they don't matter. He looked at Raymond. And I'm going to make damn sure the family that betrayed me never touches a single piece of it. Raymond extended his hand. Then let's get to work. They shook, two men standing in a vault beneath a forgotten ship, surrounded by a fortune in forgotten treasures, and began planning how to bring light back into the darkness. Because sometimes the things people abandon aren't worthless, sometimes they're priceless, sometimes they're exactly what the world needs, and sometimes the people who find them aren't lost. They're exactly where they're supposed to be. Over the next 3 days, Raymond Shaw became Marcus's guide into a past he'd never known existed. The old dock worker arrived each morning before sunrise, carrying a thermos of coffee and a lifetime of memories. They'd sit in the vault, surrounded by crates worth millions, drinking bitter coffee from cracked mugs, while Raymond told stories that painted pictures Marcus could almost see. Stories about Alistair Pembroke, a man who'd believed beauty could save the world, or at least remind people why the world was worth saving. Alistair wasn't born rich, Raymond explained on the second morning, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug for warmth. His father was a fisherman. Worked these docks until his back gave out. Alistair grew up watching cargo ships come and go, watching rich men's yachts sail past while his family ate fish for dinner because that's all they could afford. He paused, staring at something only he could see. But Alistair had a mind like a steel trap. Got himself a scholarship to business school. Started with nothing and built an empire buying and selling commercial real estate. Made his first $1 million by the time he was 35. Marcus listened, trying to imagine the man who'd created this collection. So he made his money and decided to spend it on art? Raymond shook his head. Not quite. See, Alistair never forgot where he came from. Even when he had money, real money, he still came down to the docks, still talked to guys like me, and he'd tell us about his plan. He said the rich got to see beauty every day, in their museums and galleries and private collections. But working people like his father, they never got that chance. So he decided to build something different. A museum on a ship, something that could move, that could reach people who'd never stepped foot in some fancy building downtown. The Empress, Marcus said quietly. Exactly. He bought her in 2001. She was old even then, built in the 70s, used for cheap Caribbean cruises until the company went under. But she was solid. Good bones, Alistair used to say. He had big plans, was going to renovate her completely, turn her into a floating museum dedicated to maritime history and art, free admission for anyone under 18, reduced rates for veterans and working families. He wanted everyone to be able to afford it. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. This was his story in a way, a man who came from nothing, who'd fought and struggled and made something of himself, and then tried to give back. What happened? He asked, though he already knew part of the answer. Raymond's expression darkened. Life happened. Alistair spent 2 years on renovations, poured millions into the ship, and all that time he was building his collection. Traveling the world, going to auctions, making deals with private collectors. He had this gift for finding pieces that meant something, not just expensive things, but items with stories. That ship's bell you found, from the USS Providence? Alistair tracked that down in an estate sale in Rhode Island. It had been sitting in someone's attic for 50 years. How much did he pay for it? Marcus asked. $12,000. Raymond said. Today it's worth probably $500,000, maybe more. But Alistair didn't care about the value. He cared about the story. That bell rang when America was fighting for independence. It called men to battle. It marked their victories and their losses. He wanted people to hold it, to feel that connection to history. Raymond leaned back against a crate. That's what made his collection special. Every single piece had meaning. He didn't just buy pretty paintings, he bought windows into the past. Marcus thought about the items he'd catalogued, the paintings of sea voyages, the navigation instruments, the personal journals of ship captains, each one carefully chosen, preserved, meant to be shared. Why didn't he open the museum? Marcus asked. He was close, Raymond said. So damn close. The ship was almost finished. The collection was complete. He'd hired staff, planned the grand opening for December 2003, and then, on November 4th, he was at home going over final details when his heart just stopped. Massive coronary. Dead before the ambulance arrived. He was 71 years old. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unfinished dreams. What about his family? Marcus asked. His kids? Raymond's jaw tightened. Gregory and Vanessa. Two of the most ungrateful human beings I've ever met. Alistair tried with them. God knows he tried. But they were never interested in anything except his money. Gregory was a failed real estate developer, always looking for his father to bail him out. Vanessa married 3 times, divorced 3 times, always needed more money for her lifestyle. Alistair kept them at arm's length the last few years of his life. Did they know about the collection? Marcus asked. They knew he was collecting, Raymond said. But I don't think they understood the scope. And they sure as hell didn't know about this vault. Alistair was careful. After his second divorce, after his kids proved they couldn't be trusted, he got secretive, set up trusts, created dummy corporations, kept his most valuable assets hidden. He gestured to the vault around them. This was his insurance policy, his way of making sure his dream survived even if he didn't. Marcus stood and walked to the filing cabinet, pulling out the ledger again. He'd read it a dozen times now, but each time he found new details. It says here he spent $89 million acquiring the collection. Where did he keep that kind of money? Offshore accounts mostly, Raymond said. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, places his kids couldn't touch. When he died, they got the house, some stocks, maybe 10 or 15 million total. They fought over every penny, tied up the estate in court for years. But the real fortune, the collection and the cash reserves, that was hidden so well even his lawyers didn't know about it. How did he plan to reveal it? Marcus asked. At the grand opening, Raymond explained, he was going to unveil the museum and the collection at the same time. Make a huge splash, get media attention, lock everything into a charitable foundation so his kids couldn't touch it even if they wanted to. He shook his head sadly. But he died 5 weeks before the opening, and without him to explain where everything was, without the proper documentation filed with the courts, the collection just disappeared. Everyone assumed he'd sold pieces off or donated them or stored them somewhere. Nobody thought to look here. Nobody except me. Marcus sat down heavily on a crate. You've been protecting this for 22 years. Why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you tell someone? Raymond was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I made a promise. The day before Alistair died, we were down here doing a final inventory. He was tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, Raymond, if anything happens to me, if I don't make it to opening day, I need you to keep this safe. Don't let the vultures get it. Wait for someone who understands what it means, someone who'll finish what we started. And you think I'm that person? Marcus asked, hearing the doubt in his own voice. I'm nobody. I'm a broken-down Marine with no money, no home, no future. What makes you think I can pull this off? Raymond looked him straight in the eye. Because you're still here. You could have walked away the moment you found the cash, could have grabbed a couple million and disappeared. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have stopped you. But you didn't. You stayed. You documented everything. You tried to understand what it meant. He leaned forward. That's exactly what Alistair would have done. That's exactly why I know you're the right person. Marcus wanted to believe him. God, he wanted to believe. But doubt gnawed at him like an old wound. What if I can't do it? What if I mess this up? Then you mess it up. Raymond said simply. "But at least you'll have tried, and that's more than anyone else has done in 22 years." The third day, Raymond brought documents. Real documents. Legal papers he'd kept hidden in a safety deposit box for over 2 decades. He spread them across the workbench in the vault while Marcus read through them, his heart pounding harder with each page. There was Alistair Pembroke's last will and testament, filed with the courts but heavily redacted due to ongoing legal disputes. There were incorporation papers for the Pembroke Maritime Heritage Foundation, established 3 months before his death but never activated. There were architectural plans for the museum renovation, detailed down to the placement of display cases and lighting fixtures. And there was a letter, handwritten, sealed in an envelope marked "to be opened by vessel custodian." Marcus's hands shook as he broke the seal. The letter was dated November 3, 2003, 1 day before Pembroke died. "To whoever finds this collection," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and my dream remains unfinished. I've spent the last years of my life gathering these pieces, not for profit or prestige, but because I believe beauty matters. I believe history matters. I believe ordinary people deserve access to extraordinary things. This ship was meant to be a museum, a place where anyone could come and see the best humanity has created, where children could touch history, where families could afford to spend a day surrounded by beauty, where veterans and working people weren't priced out of culture." Marcus had to stop reading. His vision blurred with tears he hadn't realized were falling. "I know the world will say I was foolish," the letter continued, "that I should have invested my money in practical things. That art is a luxury for the rich. But I've been poor and I've been wealthy, and I can tell you the only difference between the two is opportunity. The poor aren't less deserving of beauty. They just have fewer chances to experience it. This collection is my attempt to change that. If you found this vault, if you're reading this letter, then I'm asking you to finish what I started. Not for me, not for profit, but because some things matter more than money. Some dreams deserve to be realized even after the dreamer is gone. Use this collection wisely. Share it generously. And never forget that every piece here represents someone's passion, someone's story, someone's attempt to create something that would outlast them. Yours in hope, Alistair Pembroke." Marcus set the letter down carefully, as if it might disintegrate if he wasn't gentle. "He knew," Marcus said quietly. "He knew he might not live to see it finished." "He had a weak heart," Raymond said. "His doctors warned him to slow down. But Alistair said he'd rather die building something meaningful than live another 20 years watching television." He pointed to the letter. "That's your moral authority right there. That's Alistair giving permission, giving responsibility to whoever found this collection. You're not stealing, you're fulfilling his final wish." But Marcus's mind was spinning with questions, complications, fears. What about his kids? Don't they have legal claim to this? It was their father's property. "Property they couldn't find for 22 years, Raymond countered. "Property they never looked for because they didn't care. The courts declared the ship abandoned. The estate was settled years ago. This collection was never listed in probate because nobody knew it existed." "But when they find out," Marcus said, "they'll fight. They'll say I stole it. They'll tie it up in court for years." Raymond nodded slowly. "Probably. That's why we need Caroline Hart. That's why we need to establish your claim legally before anyone finds out." He pulled out his phone. "I called her yesterday, told her the basics. She wants to meet you." Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. "I'm not ready. I don't know what to say, how to explain." "You explain the truth," Raymond said firmly. "You found an abandoned collection on an abandoned ship. You documented it, you're protecting it, and you want to fulfill the original owner's wishes by turning it into the museum he intended. That's your story, and it's a damn good one." That evening, after Raymond left, Marcus sat alone in the vault trying to wrestle with the enormity of what he was considering. This wasn't just about money or treasure. This was about taking on a dead man's dream, about fighting legal battles he didn't understand against people who had resources he couldn't match, about building something permanent when his own life felt like it was built on sand. He thought about his grandfather, who'd built that house on Maple Street with his own hands, who'd taught Marcus that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he took but by what he built, who'd believed in doing things right even when wrong would have been easier. And he thought about his family, about Jennifer and Daniel, who'd stolen his inheritance without a second thought, who'd left him homeless and broken while they enjoyed the proceeds of their betrayal. They'd proven what they valued. They'd shown their true character. Maybe it was time Marcus showed his. He pulled out the business card Raymond had given him. Caroline Hart, Maritime and Property Law. He'd call her tomorrow. Start the process. Because if he'd learned anything in the Marines, it was that you didn't walk away from a mission just because it was hard. You adapted. You overcame. You finished what you started. Marcus was making coffee the next morning when he heard voices. Not inside the ship. Outside. Multiple people arguing loudly enough that their voices carried across the water. He climbed up to the main deck and looked toward the dock. 3 people stood at the base of the gangway. Even from a distance, Marcus recognized 2 of them, Jennifer and Daniel, his sister and brother. His heart started pounding. How had they found him? The third person was a man Marcus didn't know, mid-50s, wearing an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place on the industrial dock. He was gesturing animatedly, clearly arguing with a security guard who was trying to keep them from boarding. Marcus's first instinct was to hide, to retreat back into the ship and pretend he wasn't there. But something Raymond had said echoed in his mind. You're not the one who should be ashamed. They are. So Marcus straightened his shoulders, gripped his cane, and walked down the gangway to meet them. Jennifer saw him first. Her mouth fell open in genuine shock. Marcus? Hello, Jennifer, he said, his voice flat and cold. Daniel stepped forward, his expression shifting from surprise to something that might have been guilt. Jesus, Marcus. We heard you were back, but nobody knew where you were. We've been looking everywhere. Really? Marcus said. Because your text told me not to come here. Seemed pretty clear you didn't want to be found. The man in the suit stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Webb, I'm Richard Carlson, your sibling's attorney. We've been very concerned about your whereabouts. Marcus didn't shake his hand. Concerned, that's interesting. Not concerned enough to answer my calls. Not concerned enough to explain why you sold my house. Jennifer's face flushed. Marcus, we can explain. We needed the money. The property taxes were due, and we couldn't reach you, and we thought— You thought you'd steal from me, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp as broken glass. You had power of attorney for emergencies, not for selling everything I owned while I was deployed. It was an emergency, Daniel said weakly. You weren't here to take care of it. I was fighting a war, Marcus said, each word deliberate. I was bleeding for this country, and you were stealing my home. The security guard, an older man who'd been watching this exchange with increasing discomfort, stepped forward. Folks, you need to take this somewhere else. You can't block the dock. The attorney, Carlson, straightened his expensive tie. Actually, officer, my clients have come to discuss their brother's illegal occupation of this vessel. We've been informed he's been living here for over a week, which constitutes trespassing on abandoned property. Abandoned property I've secured through salvage claim, Marcus said, the words coming more confidently than he felt. I've documented everything. I've established occupancy. I have legal standing. Carlson raised an eyebrow. Salvage claim? That's ambitious for a homeless veteran squatting on a derelict ship. Tell me, Mr. Webb, do you even have legal representation? I will by this afternoon, Marcus said, thinking of Caroline Hart's card in his pocket. Jennifer took a step closer, her voice dropping to something that might have been meant to sound sympathetic. Marcus, please, we're family. We can work this out. Just come home with us. We'll find you a place to stay, help you get back on your feet. Home? Marcus laughed, bitter and hard. You sold my home. And now you want to help me? Where was that help when I came back and found everything gone? Where was that help when I had nowhere to go? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. We made a mistake, okay? We admit it. But you living on this ship, it's not safe. It's not healthy. Let us help you. I don't need your help, Marcus said. I don't need anything from either of you. You made your choice when you betrayed me. Now live with it. Carlson pulled out a document from his briefcase. Mr. Webb, this is a notice of eviction. The Port Authority has been notified of your illegal occupation. You have 72 hours to vacate the vessel and remove your belongings. If you don't comply, law enforcement will remove you forcibly. Marcus took the paper, his hands steady despite the rage burning in his chest. We'll see about that. Marcus, Jennifer tried again, her voice cracking. Please don't do this. Don't throw your life away over some stupid ship. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger, someone who shared his blood but not his values, someone who'd chosen convenience over loyalty, profit over family. I'm not throwing my life away, he said quietly. I'm building one. Something you'd never understand. He turned and walked back up the gangway, not running, not hiding, but walking with purpose. Behind him, he heard Jennifer calling his name, heard Daniel trying to reason, heard Carlson threatening legal action. But Marcus didn't stop. He climbed back onto the Empress, his ship now, his mission, and closed the door behind him. His hands were shaking. His leg throbbed from standing too long. But his mind was clear. He pulled out Caroline Hart's card and dialed the number. She answered on the second ring. Caroline Hart. Ms. Hart, my name is Marcus Webb. Raymond Shaw gave me your number. I need legal representation immediately. My family is trying to evict me from the Empress, and I need to establish salvage rights before they discover what I've found. There was a pause. What exactly have you found, Mr. Webb? Marcus looked around his small cabin, thought about the vault below, about Alistair Pembroke's letter, about $265 million in art and artifacts waiting to be revealed. Everything, he said simply. I found everything. Another pause, longer this time. I can be there in an hour. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to anyone. And for God's sake, don't let anyone board that ship until I get there. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, and for the first time since confronting his siblings, he allowed himself a small smile. Because he'd been in tight spots before. He'd been outnumbered, outgunned, fighting battles where the odds were stacked against him. But he was still here, still standing, still fighting. And this time, he wasn't fighting for some politician's idea of freedom or some general's strategic objective. This time, he was fighting for something real, something that mattered. He was fighting for beauty, for history, for the chance to build something that would outlast him. He was fighting for Alistair Pembroke's dream, and maybe, just maybe, for his own. Marcus spent the next hour pacing his cabin, too wired to sit still. Through the porthole, he watched his siblings and their lawyer arguing with the security guard. Eventually they left, but Marcus knew they'd be back. People like Jennifer and Daniel, they didn't give up when money was involved. And if they found out about the collection, if they discovered what was really hidden in the vault below, they'd fight with everything they had. He thought about Pembroke's letter, about dreams that deserved to be realized even after the dreamer was gone, about the responsibility that came with finding something precious and forgotten. And he thought about his own dreams, the ones he'd had before the war, before the injury, before the betrayal. He'd wanted to build things, to create, to leave the world better than he'd found it. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe Alistair Pembroke's unfinished dream was also Marcus Webb's second chance. A car pulled up to the dock. A woman got out, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a blazer. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose. Caroline Hart. Marcus met her at the gangway. She looked him up and down, taking in the cane, the military jacket, the tired eyes. "You Marcus Webb?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Raymond speaks highly of you, says you're the real deal." She glanced at the ship behind him. "Says you found something that could change everything." "I did," Marcus said. "Then show me," Caroline said, "and let's figure out how to keep it." They descended into the vault together, Caroline's flashlight sweeping across the crates, the filing cabinets, the careful organization of millions of dollars in forgotten treasure. She didn't speak at first, just walked slowly around the space, taking it all in. Finally, she stopped at the workbench where Pembroke's ledger lay open. She read the final entry, read the letter addressed to whoever would find the collection, and when she looked up at Marcus, her expression had changed. "Do you understand what you're sitting on?" she asked. "Raymond says $265 million, Marcus replied. "At least," Caroline said. "Maybe more." She closed the ledger carefully. "But more importantly, you're sitting on the biggest legal battle this town has seen in decades. The Pembroke heirs will fight. The state might claim abandoned property rights. The IRS will want their cut. You're looking at years of litigation." "I know," Marcus said. "So why do it? Why not just walk away, take some cash from those cases and disappear?" Marcus thought about that question. It would be easier, simpler. Take $1 million or $2 million, leave town, start over somewhere nobody knew his story. But he thought about the ship's bell from the USS Providence, about the paintings waiting to be seen, about Alistair Pembroke's dream of a place where ordinary people could experience extraordinary beauty. "Because it's the right thing to do," Marcus said simply. "Because someone needs to finish what Pembroke started, and because I'm tired of people taking instead of building." Caroline studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Okay then, let's build something." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "First, we establish your salvage claim, document everything, photograph every crate, get expert appraisals, prove you found it in good faith on an abandoned vessel. Second, we notify the Pembroke estate through official channels, full disclosure, no secrets. That protects us from claims we were hiding assets. Third, we file incorporation papers for the foundation, get the museum plan officially recognized. And fourth," she looked up at him, "we prepare for war, because your family and the Pembroke heirs are going to come after this with everything they have." Marcus nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "Now," Caroline said. "Right now, before anyone else figures out what you've found." And so they began. Two people in a vault beneath a forgotten ship, surrounded by treasure and possibility, building a legal case that would either save Marcus's future or destroy it completely. Outside, the sun set over Port Madison. The industrial port grew quiet, and the Empress, patient and ancient, held its secrets a little while longer. But not for much longer. The truth was emerging, and with it, a reckoning that would test everything Marcus thought he knew about family, loyalty, and what it really meant to fight for something worth saving. The first legal salvo came 3 days after Caroline Hart took on Marcus's case. Jennifer and Daniel, through their attorney Richard Carlson, filed an emergency injunction claiming Marcus was mentally unstable, suffering from PTSD, and illegally occupying property that posed a danger to himself and others. The court documents painted him as a homeless veteran who'd broken into an abandoned ship and was now suffering from delusions about treasure and salvage rights. They requested immediate psychiatric evaluation and forcible removal from the vessel. Caroline's response was swift and devastating. She filed a counter-motion with documentation Marcus and Raymond had compiled. Photographs of every crate in the vault, the original ledger in Alistair Pembroke's handwriting, the incorporation papers for the Maritime Museum Foundation, expert appraisals from Bernard Chen, a respected art historian who'd spent 2 days in the vault and declared the collection authentic and extraordinary. And most importantly, Pembroke's letter explicitly granting authority to whoever found the collection to complete his vision. But the real bombshell came when Caroline filed formal notification with the Pembroke estate. She sent certified letters to both Gregory and Vanessa Pembroke, informing them that their father's lost collection had been discovered, secured, and was being claimed under maritime salvage law by Marcus Webb, with the express intent of fulfilling Alistair Pembroke's original museum plan. The response was immediate and volcanic. Within 48 hours, both Pembroke children had retained high-powered law firms from Seattle. They filed competing claims asserting that as Alistair's heirs, any found property automatically belonged to them. They demanded immediate access to the ship. They accused Marcus of theft, fraud, and attempted grand larceny. They painted him as a con artist taking advantage of a dead man's legacy. The courthouse in Port Madison, which usually handled speeding tickets and small claims disputes, suddenly found itself at the center of a legal battle involving hundreds of millions of dollars. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a stern woman in her early 60s who'd presided over the county court for 20 years, scheduled an emergency hearing for the following Monday. The weekend before that hearing, Marcus barely slept. He spent hours in the vault with Caroline and Raymond, going over every detail, preparing for questions he couldn't anticipate, trying to steady his nerves for a battle that would determine everything. "They're going to come after your character," Caroline warned him on Sunday night. "They'll bring up your PTD diagnosis. They'll question your judgment. They'll try to paint you as unstable." "Let them," Marcus said quietly. "I know who I am. I know what I found. And I know what I'm trying to do." "Good," Caroline said. "Because you need to be that clear and that confident tomorrow. No wavering, no doubt. You're not asking permission. You're asserting your legal right to salvage. Understand?" Marcus nodded. "I understand." Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the sky threatening rain that never quite fell. Marcus dressed in his military dress uniform, the one he'd been discharged in, complete with his Purple Heart and service ribbons. Caroline had suggested it. "Remind them who you are," she'd said. "Remind them what you've sacrificed." They arrived at the courthouse an hour early, but the parking lot was already packed. News vans from Seattle and Portland lined the street. Reporters clustered near the entrance with cameras and microphones. Someone had leaked the story, and now it was everywhere. Homeless veteran discovers $250 million treasure on abandoned ship. The headlines screamed across every newspaper and news website. Marcus's story, the betrayal by his family, his discovery of Pembroke's collection, it had captured the public imagination in a way none of them had anticipated. Caroline squeezed his arm as they approached the courthouse. "This is good. Public opinion matters. Let them see you." Marcus walked through the gauntlet of reporters, his cane tapping steadily against the concrete, his spine straight despite the pain in his leg. Questions flew at him from every direction. "Mr. Webb, is it true your family sold your home while you were deployed? Marcus, what will you do with the money? Do you think you deserve this treasure?" He didn't answer any of them, just kept walking, kept moving forward the way he'd been trained to advance under fire. Inside, the courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back. Marcus saw his siblings sitting in the front row with their lawyer, Carlson. Jennifer looked pale and nervous. Daniel stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. 3 rows behind them sat Gregory and Vanessa Pembroke, both dressed in expensive clothes that screamed wealth and entitlement. Vanessa was in her late 50s, platinum hair perfectly styled, her face tight from too much cosmetic work. Gregory was older, mid-60s, with the florid complexion of someone who drank too much and exercised too little. They looked at Marcus with open contempt. But Marcus also saw Raymond Shaw sitting near the back, giving him a small nod of encouragement. And scattered throughout the courtroom, he saw military veterans, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, all wearing their service with quiet pride. Word had spread through veteran communities that one of their own was fighting for something that mattered. They'd come to support him. Judge Hendricks entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The judge surveyed the packed courtroom with an expression that suggested she was not pleased with the circus her courthouse had become. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine salvage rights and property claims," she began, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "I will hear arguments from all parties, review submitted evidence, and make a determination on whether this matter proceeds to full trial or can be resolved today. Mr. Carlson, you filed first. Begin." Richard Carlson stood, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. Marcus Webb is a troubled veteran who trespassed on abandoned property and is now attempting to steal items that legally belong to my clients, his own family, who hold power of attorney over his affairs due to his documented mental health issues." Caroline was on her feet instantly. "Objection. Mr. Webb's siblings have no legal power of attorney. That authority expired the moment he returned to United States soil and was discharged from military service. And he's been diagnosed with PTSD. Yes, a condition he earned serving his country, which in no way affects his mental competency or legal standing." Judge Hendricks raised her hand. Sustained. "Mr. Carlson, stick to relevant facts." Carlson adjusted his approach. "Very well. The facts are these. Jennifer and Daniel Webb acted in good faith to manage their brother's affairs while he was deployed. They made difficult decisions regarding property that was becoming a financial burden. Those decisions may have been regrettable, but they were legal. Now Mr. Webb, in what appears to be retaliation, has occupied an abandoned vessel and is making outrageous claims about finding treasure to justify his illegal occupation." "Outrageous claims?" Caroline stood again. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A through F photographic evidence of the collection. The original acquisition ledger in Alistair Pembroke's handwriting. Expert appraisal by Dr. Bernard Chen, whose credentials I've submitted. Maritime records proving the Empress was declared abandoned in 2009. And most importantly, Mr. Pembroke's own letter explicitly stating his wishes for whoever found this collection." She handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Judge Hendricks spent 20 minutes reading through the evidence, her expression unreadable. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional cough or shuffle of feet. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Carlson, are your clients claiming ownership of items they didn't know existed, on a ship they made no attempt to maintain or claim, for over 20 years? Carlson stood again. "The ship belonged to the Pembroke estate. By extension, anything on that ship belongs to the heirs." "Does it?" the judge asked. "The ship was declared legally abandoned. No one paid dock fees. No one maintained it. The Port Authority has documentation showing zero contact from the Pembroke estate since 2007. At what point does neglect constitute abandonment?" Vanessa Pembroke's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Wu, stood. "Your Honor, my clients were never informed that their father's collection was on that vessel. The estate was settled. Assets were distributed. This collection was not listed in probate because no one, including the estate's attorneys, knew it existed. That doesn't constitute abandonment. That constitutes lost property, which legally reverts to the heirs once discovered." Judge Hendricks leaned back in her chair. "And yet, Mr. Pembroke went to great lengths to hide this collection, installed climate control systems, created a sealed vault, left explicit instructions for its use. Does that sound like someone who wanted his heirs to have it?" "My father was not of sound mind in his final years," Gregory Pembroke called out from his seat. Judge Hendricks's gaze snapped to him. "Mr. Pembroke, you will remain silent unless called to testify. One more outburst and I'll have you removed." She looked at Caroline. "Ms. Hart, your turn. Make your case." Caroline stood, and when she spoke, her voice rang with conviction. "Your Honor, Marcus Webb is a decorated Marine who served 3 tours of duty and came home with a Purple Heart and injuries that will affect him for the rest of his life. While he was overseas, his own family betrayed him, sold his home, stole his inheritance, left him homeless. She gestured to Marcus. He took shelter on the Empress because he had nowhere else to go, and in doing so, he discovered something extraordinary. Not just treasure, but history, art, beauty. A collection that one good man spent his life building so that ordinary people could experience extraordinary things. She held up Pembroke's letter. Alistair Pembroke knew his family didn't share his values. That's why he hid this collection. That's why he left instructions for whoever found it. He wanted someone who understood what it meant, someone who would honor his vision, and Marcus Webb is that person. Caroline pulled out more documents. Mr. Webb has already begun the process of incorporating the Pembroke Webb Maritime Heritage Foundation exactly as Alistair Pembroke intended. He's consulted with museum experts. He's created plans for a veteran support center on the ship. He's not trying to steal anything. He's trying to finish what Alistair Pembroke started. The judge studied Marcus for a long moment. Mr. Webb, stand please. Marcus rose, leaning on his cane, and faced the judge. Mr. Webb, why should I grant you salvage rights to a collection worth hundreds of millions of dollars? Marcus took a breath. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. Because it's not about the money, Your Honor. It's about the mission. Alistair Pembroke believed beauty mattered. He believed working people deserved access to art and history. I believe that too. I've seen what happens when we forget to honor the past, when we stop building things that matter, when we let money become more important than meaning. He looked directly at the judge. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for the chance to do what I was trained to do. Complete the mission. Build something that will outlast me. Honor a good man's legacy, and maybe along the way, help other veterans who came home broken like I did. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Hendricks looked from Marcus to his siblings, to the Pembroke heirs, and back to Marcus. I'm going to make a ruling that will likely be appealed, she said finally. But it's the right ruling. The Empress was legally abandoned. Mr. Pembroke's collection was hidden with clear intent and instructions. Mr. Webb found it, secured it, and has demonstrated good faith in his handling of it. Therefore, I'm granting preliminary salvage rights to Marcus Webb, subject to the following conditions. The courtroom erupted. Jennifer gasped. Daniel put his head in his hands. Vanessa Pembroke shot to her feet, shouting, "This is theft!" Judge Hendricks slammed her gavel. "Order! Sit down, Ms. Pembroke, or I will hold you in contempt," she continued. "Mr. Webb will be granted salvage rights, but the Pembroke heirs are entitled to a settlement. I'm ordering an independent appraisal of the full collection. Once that's complete, the Pembroke heirs will receive 20% of the total value. The remaining 80% will go to Mr. Webb and the foundation, with the condition that the collection must be used for its intended purpose, a museum, open to the public, non-profit, exactly as Alistair Pembroke envisioned. She looked at Caroline. "Ms. Hart, you'll work with the court to establish proper oversight. I want quarterly reports. I want proof the foundation is operating in good faith. And I want assurances that this collection will be preserved and shared, not sold off piecemeal." "Yes, Your Honor," Caroline said, barely containing her smile. "As for the claims by Jennifer and Daniel Webb," the judge continued, her tone hardening, "I'm denying all requests. You have no legal standing regarding this collection. However," she looked at Marcus, "I'm also ordering an investigation into the sale of Mr. Webb's property. If fraud occurred, if power of attorney was abused, there may be criminal consequences." Jennifer started crying. Daniel stared at the floor. And Marcus, for the first time in months, felt something close to vindication. Outside the courthouse, the media mob was twice as large. Marcus stood at the top of the steps with Caroline, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Webb, how do you feel about the judge's decision?" a reporter called out. Marcus thought about that question. How did he feel? "I feel like justice was served," he said simply. Not just for me, but for Alistair Pembroke. His dream was stolen by time and circumstance. Now it gets a second chance. And so do I. What will you do with the money? Another reporter asked. Build the museum Pembroke wanted, Marcus said, and create a veteran support center, a place where people who served can find help, purpose, training, a place where they're not forgotten. Your family sold your home while you were deployed, a reporter said. Do you forgive them? Marcus looked directly into the camera. Forgiveness isn't about them, it's about me. And I'm not there yet. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm focused on building, not hating. The story exploded. Within 24 hours, Marcus's face was on every news outlet in the country. Homeless veteran turns betrayal into triumph. Marine discovers lost treasure, builds museum to honor fallen. From broken to builder, one man's fight for justice. The public support was overwhelming. Donations poured into the foundation's newly established website. Veterans from across the country reached out, offering to volunteer, to help with renovations, to be part of something that mattered. Construction companies offered materials at cost. Architects volunteered their time. And slowly, impossibly, the Empress began to transform. The first thing Marcus did was hire Raymond Shaw as the foundation's operations manager. The old dock worker wept when Marcus offered him the job. Alistair would be so proud, Raymond said, his voice breaking. You're doing it. You're really doing it. The second thing Marcus did was reach out to veterans organizations. He partnered with the VA to create the first ever floating veteran support center, counseling rooms for PTSD treatment, job training workshops, a residential program for homeless veterans, giving them a place to live while they rebuilt their lives. Classes in everything from welding to computer programming, all taught by volunteers who believed in the mission. Within 6 months, the Empress was unrecognizable. The rust was gone, replaced by fresh paint. The decks were repaired and reinforced. The interior, once dark and decaying, now gleamed with carefully designed exhibit spaces. And in the center of it all, the vault was transformed into the crown jewel, a climate-controlled gallery where Pembroke's collection was finally displayed the way he'd intended. The paintings hung on walls covered in rich fabric. The sculptures sat on pedestals with perfect lighting. The ship's bell from the USS Providence had a place of honor, and visitors were encouraged to touch it, to feel the weight of history in their hands. The grand opening was scheduled for November 4th, exactly 22 years after Alistair Pembroke's death. The date was intentional, a tribute to the man whose dream had finally been realized. The night before the opening, Marcus stood alone on the deck of the Empress, looking out over the port. The city lights reflected off the water, painting everything in shades of gold and silver. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The war, the injury, the betrayal, the dark nights when he'd wondered if he had any reason to keep going. And he thought about what he'd built. Not just a museum, but a purpose. A place where beauty and healing intersected, where veterans could find community, where children could touch history, where ordinary people could experience extraordinary things. Footsteps behind him. Marcus turned to see Caroline approaching, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered him one. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Too much to think about, Marcus admitted. Tomorrow changes everything. Tomorrow proves everything, Caroline corrected. Proves you were right. Proves that good can come from pain. Proves that some dreams deserve to be finished. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the water. You know the Pembroke heirs are still fighting, Caroline said eventually. They're appealing the settlement percentage. Vanessa's claiming emotional distress. Marcus nodded. Let them fight. They'll lose. And even if they win a bigger percentage, the foundation is secure. The museum is real. They can't touch that. Your siblings are facing charges, Caroline continued. The investigation found they forged documents to get power of attorney. They could serve time. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. "Good," he said finally. "Actions have consequences. Maybe they'll learn that." The next morning, a crowd of over 3,000 people lined up outside the Empress. Veterans in uniform, families with children, art lovers, history enthusiasts, people who'd followed Marcus's story and wanted to see the dream realized. Local news crews set up cameras, national outlets sent reporters, and standing near the front of the line, Marcus saw faces he recognized. Ethan Cross, the maritime historian who'd helped with research; Bernard Chen, who'd appraised the collection; dozens of veterans who'd volunteered on the restoration; and Raymond Shaw, standing beside a framed photograph of Alistair Pembroke. Marcus stepped up to the microphone that had been set up near the gangway. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was strong. 22 years ago, a good man named Alistair Pembroke died with a dream unfinished. He'd spent his life building a collection of art and history, not to hoard it, but to share it. He wanted to create a place where anyone, regardless of wealth or status, could experience beauty, could feel connected to the past, could remember what humanity is capable of creating. He gestured to the ship behind him. This place, the Pembroke Webb Maritime Heritage Museum, is that dream realized. But it's more than just a museum. It's a promise that beauty matters, that history matters, that the people who serve and sacrifice for this country matter. His voice grew stronger. "I came home from war with nothing. My family had taken everything. I was broken, homeless, ready to give up. But I found shelter on this ship, and what I discovered here wasn't just treasure, it was purpose. It was a reminder that even when everything seems lost, you can still build something that matters." He looked directly at the veterans in the crowd. "This place is for you, for us, for everyone who served and wondered if anyone cared, for everyone who came home broken and needed a reason to keep fighting. This museum is yours. The support center is yours. The programs, the training, the community, all of it is yours." Tears streamed down his face now, but he didn't wipe them away. Alistair Pembroke believed ordinary people deserved extraordinary things. I believe that too, and today we prove it. He stepped back and pulled the ribbon stretched across the gangway. "Welcome home." The crowd erupted in applause. People surged forward, eager to see what had been hidden for so long. Marcus stood to the side, watching them board, watching their faces light up as they entered the gallery and saw Pembroke's collection for the first time. Children pressed their hands against the ship's bell. Veterans stood in silent reverence before paintings of naval battles. Families wandered through exhibits that told stories of courage and exploration and human achievement. And in the Veteran Support Center, counselors welcomed the first residents, men and women who'd served and struggled, who needed help and hope and a place to belong. By the end of the day, over 5,000 people had toured the museum. The reviews were overwhelming. Art critics called it a triumph of vision and determination. Veterans groups hailed it as a model for what support should look like. And the public, ordinary people who'd followed Marcus's story, simply said, "Thank you." That night, after the crowds had gone and the ship was quiet again, Marcus sat in the gallery surrounded by Pembroke's collection. He pulled out the letter he'd found in the vault, the one Alistair had written to whoever would find his life's work. He read it again, for perhaps the 100th time, and felt a connection across the years to a man he'd never met but understood completely. "We did it," Marcus whispered to the empty room. "Your dream is real. People are seeing it, people are feeling it, and it's going to help so many people find their way home." He thought about his own transformation. From the broken veteran who'd stepped off a Greyhound bus with nowhere to go, to the director of a foundation that would help thousands. He thought about how close he'd come to giving up, how easy it would have been to take the money and run, to let bitterness consume him, to become just another casualty of a system that chewed people up and forgot about them. But he'd chosen differently. He'd chosen to build instead of destroy, to honor instead of exploit, to finish what someone else had started because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he'd found something he'd lost in the desert. He'd found himself. 6 months after the opening, Marcus stood in the office he'd created on the ship's bridge. The walls were covered with photos. Veterans who'd completed the training program and found jobs. Families who'd visited the museum and written thank you letters. News articles about the Foundation's impact. And one photo that meant more than all the others. It showed Marcus and Raymond standing in front of the ship, arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling. Behind them, the Empress gleamed in the sunlight, no longer forgotten, no longer abandoned, but alive with purpose. His phone buzzed. A text from Caroline. Court of Appeals upheld your salvage rights. The Pembroke appeal was denied. It's officially over. You won. Marcus smiled and looked out the window at the port below. Children were playing on the nearby dock. Couples walked hand in hand. And a steady stream of visitors climbed the gangway to the museum to experience beauty and history and hope. He thought about his grandfather's house, the one his family had stolen. He'd never get it back. That part of his past was gone forever. But he'd built something better, something bigger, something that would outlast him by generations. His legs still hurt. The shrapnel was still there, a permanent reminder of what he'd survived. The nightmares still came sometimes, jolting him awake in the dark hours before dawn. But now, when he woke up scared and alone, he had a reason to get out of bed. He had a mission to complete, people to help, a legacy to maintain. The door to his office opened. A young veteran, maybe 23, poked his head in nervously. "Mr. Webb, sorry to bother you. I'm starting the welding program tomorrow. Just wanted to say thank you for this place, for believing in us." Marcus stood and extended his hand. "You don't have to thank me. Just do the work. Build your life. And when you get the chance, help someone else do the same. That's how we honor the people who came before us." The young man nodded, shook his hand firmly, and left. Marcus sat back down, but he was smiling. This was what mattered, not the money, not the recognition, not the vindication of seeing his family face consequences for their betrayal. But this, the knowledge that broken things could be fixed, that abandoned dreams could be resurrected, that even the most forgotten people still had value, still had purpose, still had the power to change the world if someone just gave them a chance. Anyone can rebuild what's been broken if they're willing to believe it's worth saving. As the sun set over Port Madison, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Marcus Webb stood on the deck of the Empress, no longer a homeless veteran with nowhere to go, but a guardian of beauty, a builder of futures, a living reminder that second chances aren't given. They're earned through grit and faith and the courage to finish what others started. He'd come home from war to find his family had erased him, stolen his past, left him for dead. But in the belly of a forgotten ship, he'd found more than treasure. He'd found redemption. He'd found purpose. He'd found proof that even the most broken people can become heroes if they refuse to give up. Because for Marcus and for the thousands of veterans who would walk through these doors in the years to come, the message was clear. You're not forgotten. You're not alone. And your story isn't over. It's just beginning. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of courage, resilience, and transformation. Click to discover what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept defeat. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe broken things can become beautiful again. If you believe that second chances are real. And if you believe that sometimes the people the world abandons are exactly the ones who change it forever.